The crimson emergency lights bathed the Galactic Council's war chamber in an ominous glow. Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian fleet stood before the massive holographic display, his 6 arms trembling as he watched entire star systems fall to the advancing void swarm. The ancient enemy had returned after 10,000 years of silence, and this time they brought weapons that could tear through reality itself. "Another colony lost," whispered Chancellor Morvik, her crystalline form dimming with despair. "The Arcturus system is gone. 3 billion souls consumed by the darkness." The assembled representatives of 47 species sat in stunned silence. The void swarm had always been the stuff of legends, whispered tales from the Dark Ages when the galaxy was young. Now those nightmares walked among the stars again, leaving nothing but empty space where thriving worlds once existed. Commander Zareth of the Hegemony Defense Corps pulled up tactical data with his mechanical appendages. "Our combined fleets are no match for them. They adapt to our weapons faster than we can deploy them. Energy shields mean nothing to creatures that exist partially outside our dimension." The war had lasted only 3 months, but already a quarter of the galaxy's inhabited systems lay in ruins. The swarm moved like a plague of living shadow, their bioships growing stronger with each world they devoured. Conventional weapons passed through them like light through fog, while their own attacks could phase through any known defense system. "What about the ancient protocols?" asked Senator Quindall, his reptilian features etched with desperation. "Surely our predecessors left us something to fight this menace." Admiral Kethvar's primary eyes darkened. "We've searched every archive, every forgotten database. The previous galactic civilizations that faced the swarm either fled to distant galaxies or were completely destroyed. There are no weapons, no tactics, nothing that worked against them." The chamber fell silent, except for the distant hum of the space station's life support systems. Outside the reinforced windows, rescue ships carried refugees from the latest evacuated worlds. Children pressed their faces against the glass, watching their homeworlds burn in the distance. Chancellor Morvik stood slowly, her voice carrying the weight of impending doom. "Then we must consider the unthinkable. Total evacuation to the Magellanic Clouds. At least some of our species might survive to rebuild." "Running away won't solve anything," interrupted a voice from the back of the chamber. The assembled council members turned to see a figure they barely recognized anymore. Ambassador Sarah Chen of Earth had been mostly silent since the war began, her small frame dwarfed by the towering alien representatives around her. The human diplomat stepped forward, her aged hands clasped behind her back. At 83 years old, she moved with the careful dignity of someone who had witnessed both the rise and fall of empires. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her dark eyes held secrets that even her closest allies had never guessed. "The humans have been remarkably quiet during these proceedings," noted Admiral Kethvar, not unkindly. "Do your people have suggestions for fighting an enemy that exists beyond our understanding of physics?" "Actually, Admiral, we do. But first, I need to tell you something about humanity that we've kept hidden for the past century." She touched her wrist communicator, and suddenly the chamber's main display shifted. Instead of tactical readouts and casualty reports, images began to appear that none of the alien representatives had ever seen. Ancient Earth, primitive and savage, where armored warriors clashed with bronze swords under stormy skies. Medieval battlefields where knights charged into impossible odds. Trenches filled with mud and blood where soldiers held the line against overwhelming darkness. You see, honored council members, you've only known humanity for 120 years. You met us when we were already civilized, already peaceful, already committed to diplomacy and trade. What you don't know is what we were before that transformation. The images continued to flow across the screen. Roman legions marching in perfect formation. Samurai facing down armies with nothing but steel and honor. Vikings sailing into unknown waters to raid and conquer. Apache warriors vanishing into desert landscapes, only to strike without warning. For 90% of human history, we were what you might call a warrior species, not just capable of violence, but shaped by it, forged by it. Every major advancement in our technology, our organization, our very evolution as a species, came through conflict. Commander Zareth's mechanical voice carried a note of confusion. "But Ambassador, Humans are known throughout the galaxy as peaceful traders and diplomats. Your species hasn't engaged in warfare for over a century. Sarah Chen's smile widened, and now it carried an edge that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. That's because we chose to put that part of ourselves away. We learned to be better than our nature, but we never lost those instincts, never forgot those skills. We just buried them deep and hoped we'd never need them again. She gestured to the display, which now showed more recent images, hidden military installations on Earth's moon, weapons testing facilities in the asteroid belt, ships under construction in orbital shipyards that none of the Council's intelligence services had ever detected. The thing about the Void Swarm is that they're not really alive in any way you understand. They're weapons, created by a long-dead civilization to be the perfect killing machines. They exist partially outside normal spacetime, so they can't be fought with conventional tactics. They adapt instantly to any regular military strategy. Admiral Kethvar leaned forward, his multiple eyes focusing intently on the human ambassador. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying that everything you know about warfare comes from conflicts between civilized species. Rules of engagement, humanitarian concerns, minimizing collateral damage. You fight wars the way rational beings should fight wars. Erosine paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the chamber. But the Void Swarm isn't rational. They don't follow rules. They don't have civilians to protect or infrastructure to preserve. They're pure aggression, pure hunger, pure destruction. The display shifted again, showing tactical simulations that made several council members gasp in horror. Human ships moving in formations that defied every known principle of space combat. Weapons that seemed designed not just to destroy enemy vessels, but to cause maximum psychological terror. Battle plans that involved accepting catastrophic losses to achieve strategic objectives. To fight monsters, sometimes you need monsters of your own, Sarah Chen said quietly. And humanity has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of being beautiful, terrible monsters when the situation demands it. She turned to face the full council, her elderly frame somehow radiating an authority that made beings 3 times her size step back instinctively. I'm formally requesting that the Galactic Council authorize the deployment of Earth's hidden fleet under Protocol Omega. Chancellor Morvek's crystalline form flickered with alarm. Protocol Omega? Ambassador, that authorization is only for species-level extinction events. Chancellor, with respect, what exactly do you think this is? Sarah Chen gestured toward the display showing the advancing Void Swarm. They've already consumed a quarter of our galaxy. In 6 months, they'll reach the core systems. In a year, everything we've built together will be nothing but empty space and scattered atoms. The chamber erupted in confused voices as representatives demanded explanations, clarifications, details about this hidden fleet that apparently existed without their knowledge. Sarah Chen stood calmly in the center of the chaos, waiting for the storm to pass. Finally, Admiral Kethvar called for order. Ambassador Chen, assuming the Council grants this authorization, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we stop fighting the Void Swarm like civilized beings trying to minimize casualties and preserve infrastructure. I'm proposing that we fight them like our ancestors fought when the very survival of their tribes hung in the balance. She touched her communicator again, and the display showed a single image that silenced every voice in the chamber. An elderly human man in a simple military uniform, his face scarred by old battles, his eyes holding the weight of unimaginable experience. Behind him stood row upon row of similar figures, men and women whose very presence seemed to radiate barely contained violence. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of all species, I present General Marcus Kane and the Old Guard. These are the warriors who won humanity's last great war before we joined the galactic community. They've been waiting in stasis for over a century, hoping they'd never be needed again. The silence in the chamber was broken only by the soft hum of the life support systems. Several alien representatives had begun backing toward the exits, driven by instincts they didn't fully understand. The Void Swarm thinks it knows how to fight, Sarah Chen continued. They've consumed civilizations that fought with honor, with restraint, with hope for peaceful resolution. They've never faced an enemy that fights dirty, fights smart, and fights with absolutely nothing left to lose. She smiled one last time, and in that expression was the echo of every human warrior who had ever stood against impossible odds and somehow found a way to win. It's time to remind the universe why humanity spent 10,000 years at the top of its own food chain. It's time to show the Void Swarm what happens when you threaten not just our lives, but our families, our children, our entire way of existence. The vote was called 20 minutes later. Protocol Omega was authorized by unanimous consent, though several representatives requested immediate transport to their homeworlds first. As the council chamber emptied, Sarah Chen stood alone before the tactical display. Watching the red indicators that marked the swarm's advance, she touched her communicator one final time. This is Ambassador Chen to Deep Station Alpha. Authorization code Omega-77 Black. Wake 'em up, General. It's time to go to war. In the depths of space, hidden installations that had slumbered for a century began to stir to life. And in stasis chambers scattered across a dozen secret bases, warriors who had hoped never to fight again opened their eyes and reached for weapons that civilized species preferred to pretend didn't exist. The galaxy was about to remember why humanity had once been known by a very different name. In darker times, when the universe was young and mercy was a luxury no one could afford, the old guard was awakening, and they were coming home to a war that would either save everything they held dear or destroy it all in the attempt. General Marcus Kane stood before the assembled fleet commanders in the war room of Deep Station Alpha, his presence filling the space with an authority earned through decades of impossible victories. At 94 years old, he looked every day of his age, but his eyes burned with the same fierce intelligence that had once turned the tide of the Terran Coalition wars. The scars on his weathered face told stories of battles fought in the dark years, before humanity learned to play nice with the galaxy. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation is worse than we hoped, but exactly what we prepared for, Kane began, his gravelly voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Behind him, holographic displays showed the real-time position of the Void Swarm, their bioships moving like cancer through the galaxy's spiral arms. Colonel Sarah Vasquez, Kane's second-in-command, activated the tactical overview. At 78, she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent her youth dancing between laser fire and plasma bursts. Conventional forces have been routed in every engagement. The enemy adapts to standard military doctrine within hours of first contact. The assembled officers nodded grimly. These were men and women who had volunteered to spend over a century in stasis rather than retire to comfortable lives on peaceful worlds. They had understood, even then, that sometimes the price of peace was having dangerous people ready to do terrible things when civilization's back was against the wall. Sir, intelligence reports suggest the swarm operates on a hive mind principle, said Commander Chen Wei, studying the data streams flowing across his tablet. Individual bioships seem to share tactical knowledge instantaneously. They learn from every encounter and pass that information to the entire fleet. Kane's lined face creased into something that might have been a smile on a more peaceful man. Good. That means when we start teaching them lessons, every single one of them will learn not to underestimate human creativity. He gestured to the star charts where red indicators marked the swarm's advance toward the galaxy's core systems. The enemy expects resistance to follow predictable patterns, fleet engagements at the edge of star systems, defensive formations protecting critical infrastructure, evacuation protocols prioritizing civilian safety. Colonel Vasquez picked up the briefing seamlessly, their partnership honed through countless campaigns. They've never faced an enemy that prioritizes mission success over everything else. They don't understand the concept of acceptable losses when survival is at stake. The war room fell silent as the implications sank in. These officers remembered wars where victory came at prices that peacetime civilizations couldn't comprehend. They had made decisions that haunted their dreams but saved their species. Admiral Torres, status report on the hidden fleet? Kane requested. Admiral Elena Torres stood from her position near the tactical displays. Her dark hair had gone white during the century in stasis, but her posture remained ramrod straight. 73 vessels fully operational and crewed by volunteers from the old guard. Another 47 ships coming online within the next 6 hours. All crews have completed combat readiness protocols. She paused, her expression growing grave. Sir, I should mention that several senior officers have requested permission to record final messages for their families. The crew understands the nature of the tactics we'll be employing. Kane nodded slowly. The Hidden Fleet wasn't designed for the kind of warfare that allowed soldiers to return home to their loved ones. These ships carried weapons that the Galactic Council had banned decades ago. Technology that could crack planets or turn entire star systems into cosmic graveyards. They were tools for fighting enemies that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be contained, and couldn't be allowed to exist. Granted, Admiral. Make sure every person on every ship understands they're volunteering for a one-way mission. Anyone who wants to transfer to evacuation duties can do so without prejudice. Commander Chen Wei looked up from his intelligence reports. General, we've been monitoring Galactic Council communications. Their military leaders are asking about our tactical plans. They want to coordinate our efforts with their remaining fleets. The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle hum of the station's systems. Finally, Colonel Vasquez spoke, her voice carefully neutral. Sir, how much should we tell them about Operation Lazarus? Kane walked to the main display, studying the positions of both the Void Swarm and the scattered remnants of galactic civilization, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he considered the question that would define how history remembered this moment. Nothing, he said finally. The Council species are good people fighting a clean war against an enemy that doesn't understand the concept. If they knew what we're about to do, they'd try to stop us. And if they tried to coordinate with us, they'd die. He turned back to his officers, and for a moment they saw not the elderly statesman he had become, but the warrior he had always been. The galaxy has had 120 years of peace because we buried our weapons and our willingness to use them. But those weapons were never destroyed, and that willingness never died. It just went to sleep. Admiral Torres activated another section of the display, showing ship configurations that made several officers wince despite their experience. The Void Swarm bioships phase in and out of normal space-time. Conventional weapons can't maintain target lock when the enemy exists partially in other dimensions. Which is why we're not using conventional weapons, Kane replied. Dr. Reeves, status on the quantum tethering devices? Elizabeth Reeves stepped forward, her scientific mind wrestling with the moral implications of her own creations. Fully functional, General. The tethering devices will lock onto enemy bioships and anchor them in normal space-time regardless of their phase state. Once tethered, they'll be vulnerable to kinetic and energy weapons. Commander Chen Wei frowned as he studied the technical specifications. Doctor, these devices work by creating localized tiers in space-time itself. The energy requirements alone should make them impossible to deploy. Dr. Reeves's expression grew haunted. They're powered by controlled singularities, Commander. Each tethering device essentially weaponizes a black hole. The power output is theoretically unlimited, but the containment systems have a calculated lifespan of approximately 47 minutes. The implications hung heavy in the air. Ships carrying quantum tethering devices were flying bombs that would eventually consume themselves and everything around them. It was technology that peaceful civilizations would never develop because the risk outweighed any possible benefit. How many ships can we equip with tethering devices? Kane asked. All of them, sir. Every ship in the Hidden Fleet carries at least 2 devices. The larger vessels carry up to 6. Kane nodded grimly. Then we'll use every single one. The swarm has existed for millions of years because no civilization has ever been desperate enough to deploy weapons like these. They've never faced an enemy willing to destroy entire star systems to stop them. Colonel Vasquez brought up the tactical timeline. Sir, the swarm's main tendril is currently moving through the Kepler sector. If we deploy the fleet now, we can intercept them before they reach the core systems. Negative, Colonel. We're going to let them advance further. The war room erupted in surprised voices before Kane raised his hand for silence. The swarm adapts to resistance. If we hit them at the edge of civilized space, they'll modify their tactics and become even more dangerous. We need to hit them when they're overextended, when they think they've already won. Admiral Torres understood first, her face paling as the strategy became clear. Sir, you're proposing to let them reach the core systems. Terra Nova, New Genesis, the trade hub worlds. Billions of civilians will be in immediate danger. Billions of civilians are already dead, Admiral. The question is whether we save the survivors by fighting smart or lose everyone by fighting fair. Kane's voice carried the weight of similar decisions made in darker times. The swarm thinks in terms of total consumption. They won't expect resistance to suddenly intensify when they're seemingly close to victory. He gestured to the star charts highlighting the planned intercept point. We'll hit them here, in the Terra Nova system, close enough to the core worlds that their entire fleet will be concentrated for the final push. Far enough from the galactic center that we can use the more destructive weapons without causing cascade failures in nearby star systems. Commander Chenwei studied the plan, his tactical mind working through the implications. General, this strategy requires perfect timing. If we're even 6 hours late, the swarm could overrun Terra Nova before we arrive. Then we won't be late, Commander. The Hidden Fleet has been waiting over a century for this mission. Every ship, every weapon, every single person in this fleet exists for one purpose: to face an enemy that civilization can't survive. Dr. Reeves activated her personal display, showing technical readouts that made the assembled officers shift uncomfortably. Sir, I should mention that the weapons we'll be deploying have never been tested under actual combat conditions. The theoretical models suggest they'll work, but the power levels involved are beyond anything we've ever attempted. Kane's scarred face showed no emotion. Doctor, in approximately 18 hours, we're going to be fighting for the survival of every intelligent species in the galaxy. Theoretical models and untested weapons are what we have. They'll have to be enough. He walked to the observation window, looking out at the Hidden Fleet ships moving through space like sharks preparing for a feeding frenzy. Each vessel carried technology that could reshape the laws of physics, weapons that could unmake the building blocks of reality itself. I want all ships to begin final preparations immediately. Combat crews to battle stations. All quantum tethering devices armed and ready for deployment. And I want everyone to understand exactly what we're asking of them. The general turned back to his officers, and in his eyes was the reflection of every impossible victory, every Pyrrhic triumph that had defined humanity's rise to power. The galaxy is about to witness what happens when humanity stops pretending to be civilized. The Void Swarm has consumed 1,000 peaceful civilizations, but they've never faced warriors who learned their trade in the crucible of absolute warfare. Admiral Torres saluted with parade ground precision. Sir, the fleet is ready to deploy on your command. Kane returned the salute, his voice carrying the weight of a century's worth of preparation. Then let's go remind the universe why the monsters in human nightmares are afraid of the dark. It's time to show the Void Swarm what terror really looks like. As the officers dispersed to their ships, Kane remained at the observation window, watching the Hidden Fleet prepare for a battle that would either save the galaxy or destroy it in the attempt. In the distance, enemy signals moved like death itself through the void, unaware that they were about to face an enemy that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of beautiful, terrible violence. The old guard was going to war one last time, and this time there would be no rules, no mercy, and no prisoners, only victory or extinction, with nothing in between. The Terra Nova system burned with the light of artificial stars as the Hidden Fleet engaged the Void Swarm in the most desperate battle in galactic history. General Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the command ship Retribution, watching through reinforced windows as reality itself began to tear apart under the strain of weapons that should never have been built. Tethering devices deployed across the enemy formation, reported Admiral Torres from her position at the tactical station. Quantum anchors are holding. The swarm bioships are locked in normal space-time. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Void Swarm found themselves unable to phase away from incoming fire. The massive bioships writhed like wounded animals as human weapons tore through flesh that had previously been untouchable. Kilometer-long creatures that had devoured entire civilizations screamed across frequencies that made nearby space itself vibrate. Enemy adaptation in progress, Commander Chenwei announced, his voice tight with concentration. They're trying to modify their phase capabilities to break free of the quantum tethers. Kane's weathered face remained impassive as he watched the tactical displays. How long before they succeed? Estimated 12 to 15 minutes, sir. Their learning algorithms are faster than our models predicted. The general nodded calmly, as if discussing weather patterns rather than the potential extinction of all intelligent life. More than enough time. Colonel Vasquez, Initiate Operation Lazarus. All ships are authorized to deploy their final weapons. Prot. Throughout the hidden fleet, ancient warriors who had hoped never to fight again pressed activation sequences that would either save the galaxy or tear it apart. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves monitored the quantum cascade effects from her station, watching energy readings that broke every known law of physics. Sir, the singularity cores are approaching critical resonance. Once we cross that threshold, there's no way to contain the reaction, she reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were unleashing. Kane watched as the first wave of human ships began their suicide runs directly into the heart of the swarm formation. Each vessel carried weapons that could crack moons, powered by controlled black holes that would eventually consume the ships themselves. The crews aboard those vessels had volunteered for certain death, understanding that their sacrifice might be the only thing standing between civilization and absolute darkness. Enemy bioships are attempting to retreat, announced Admiral Torres. The swarm queen ship is trying to pull back to a safe distance. Negative. They don't get to run from this fight. Kane's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades making impossible decisions. All remaining ships pursue and engage. Don't let a single enemy vessel escape this system. The battle had been raging for 3 hours, and already half the hidden fleet had been destroyed or disabled. But for every human ship lost, dozens of swarm bioships lay dead in space, their quantum-phased flesh finally vulnerable to weapons designed by a species that had turned warfare into an art form. Commander Chen Wei looked up from his displays with alarm. General, we're detecting massive energy buildups in the surviving enemy ships. They're preparing some kind of final attack. Through the main viewer, the remaining swarm bioships began to glow with malevolent light. Their flesh became translucent, revealing the cosmic horrors that existed within their bodies. Ancient entities that predated the formation of galaxies began to manifest in normal spacetime, their very presence causing nearby stars to flicker and dim. Sir, they're summoning something, Dr. Reeves said, her scientific training warring with the primal terror that gripped her as she watched the readings. The energy signatures suggest they're opening a gateway to whatever dimension they originally came from. Kane studied the tactical display as reality began to warp around the enemy formation. Space itself twisted into impossible geometries, and through the tears in the fabric of existence, glimpses of an infinite darkness became visible. The Void Swarm wasn't just an invasion force, he realized. They were the scouts for something infinitely worse. How long before that gateway fully opens? He asked. Approximately 4 minutes, sir. Once it stabilizes, whatever's on the other side will have direct access to our galaxy. The general walked to the communication station, his decision already made. Open a channel to all remaining ships. Throughout the scattered fleet, exhausted warriors listened as their commander's voice filled their bridges one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an honor serving with you. The enemy is attempting to summon reinforcements from beyond our reality. We can't allow that to happen. He paused, looking out at the stars his species had dreamed of reaching since they first looked up from their ancient homeworld. All ships with remaining quantum charges converge on my position. We're going to close that gateway the hard way. Admiral Torres looked at him with understanding and pride. Sir, a concentrated detonation of all remaining singularity cores will create a gravity well that could collapse this entire system. Better a dead system than a dead galaxy, Admiral. Kane's voice carried the weight of every impossible choice he had ever made. Dr. Reeves, can you synchronize the remaining cores for simultaneous detonation? The scientist's hands flew over her controls, tears streaming down her face as she programmed the codes that would end everything. Synchronization complete, sir. All remaining ships report ready for final deployment. Through the tactical displays, they watched as the last 37 ships of the Hidden Fleet moved into position around the expanding gateway. Veterans who had fought in wars that peaceful civilizations couldn't imagine prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice for species they had never met, on worlds they would never see. Sir, incoming transmission from the Galactic Council, Commander Chen Wei reported. Put them through. Ambassador Sarah Chen's face appeared on the main screen, her elderly features etched with grief and pride. Behind her, representatives of dozens of species watched with expressions of awe and horror. General Kane, on behalf of every civilized world in this galaxy, I want to thank you and your warriors for what you've done here today. Kane nodded respectfully to the woman who had made this moment possible. Ambassador, it's been our privilege to serve. Make sure the galaxy remembers that peace isn't free. Someone always has to be willing to pay the price. And we'll remember, General. We'll all remember. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Retribution in contemplative silence. Outside, the gateway continued to expand as things that had never known the light of stars began to push through from the dimension beyond reality. Sir, the gateway is approaching critical stability. If we're going to act, it has to be now, Reeves announced. Kane looked around the bridge one final time, seeing the faces of warriors who had chosen duty over survival, honor over safety. These were the inheritors of 10,000 years of human conflict, the final guardians of a species that had learned to be better than its nature, but never forgot the terrible beauty of its past. All ships, this is General Kane. Execute Operation Lazarus. For Earth, for humanity, and for every world that dreams of peace. The synchronized detonation of 37 weaponized singularities created a light brighter than the system's star. Space-time itself folded in upon itself as competing gravity wells tore reality apart at the subatomic level. The expanding gateway collapsed like a house of cards, sealing the dimensional breach and trapping the emerging entities in the space between dimensions. The remaining Void Swarm bioships were caught in the gravitational anomaly, their ancient flesh unable to resist forces that could bend the laws of physics. One by one, they were drawn into the artificial black hole created by humanity's final gambit, their death screams echoing across frequencies that would haunt the galaxy for generations. In the moments before the expanding gravity well claimed the Retribution, Kane stood calmly on his bridge, watching as the last traces of the Void Swarm disappeared into the hungry darkness. The threat that had consumed a quarter of the galaxy was finally ended, sealed away in a dimensional prison that would hold until the heat death of the universe. Sir, it's been an honor, Admiral Torres said quietly. The honor was mine, Admiral. The honor was always mine. The Terra Nova system collapsed into a single point of infinite density, taking with it the hidden fleet, the Void Swarm, and the dimensional gateway that would have doomed the galaxy. Where a thriving star system had once existed, only empty space remained, marked by gravitational anomalies that would puzzle scientists for millennia. 3 days later, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the Galactic Council once more, this time addressing a chamber filled with representatives who understood exactly what humanity had sacrificed for their survival. The war was over, the threat eliminated, but the cost had been almost too terrible to comprehend. The hidden fleet is gone, she announced to the silent chamber. General Kane and his warriors died as they lived, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The Void Swarm has been permanently eliminated, and the dimensional breach has been sealed. Chancellor Morvek rose slowly, her crystalline form glowing with emotions that had no names. Ambassador Chen, how do we even begin to repay such a debt? Your species sacrificed their greatest warriors to save us all. Sarah Chen smiled, and in that expression was both grief for the lost and pride for their sacrifice. You repay it by remembering, Chancellor. You remember that peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of those willing to stand guard in the darkness. She gestured to the memorial display that now dominated the chamber's main screen, showing the names and faces of every warrior who had died in the Terra Nova system. These men and women spent over a century in stasis because they understood that sometimes civilized solutions aren't enough. Sometimes you need people who remember how to be monsters when monsters are what the situation requires. Admiral Kethvar stood with all 6 arms raised in salute. Their sacrifice will be remembered by every species, on every world, for as long as civilization endures. That's all they ever asked for. Sarah Chen replied quietly. To be remembered not as killers, but as guardians. Not as monsters, but as the warriors who chose to carry the darkness so that others could live in the light. The memorial service lasted 7 hours, with representatives from 47 species sharing stories of worlds that would exist only because elderly human warriors had remembered how to fight impossible wars. In the end, the galaxy understood that it had been saved, not by superior technology or brilliant tactics, but by a simple truth that humanity had never forgotten. Sometimes, The price of peace is having dangerous people ready to do terrible things when everything else fails. The Void Swarm was gone, sealed away in a dimensional prison that would hold until the end of time itself. The galaxy was safe, protected by the sacrifice of warriors who had chosen duty over survival and honor over safety. And in the empty space where the Terra Nova system had once existed, a memorial beacon broadcast a simple message across all frequencies. Here stood humanity's finest, who gave everything so that others might live. They asked for no reward but remembrance, no payment but peace. Let their sacrifice remind us all that freedom isn't free, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is the willingness to become what others fear, so they never have to. The old guard had fought their final battle, and in doing so, they had saved not just the galaxy, but the very idea that civilization could triumph over chaos. Their names would be spoken with reverence for millennia to come, remembered not as weapons of war but as guardians of everything that made life worth living. In the end, that was enough. It was more than enough.